From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana.
Before I start, I would like to ask one question just to know you better. How many of you have more than 5 pair of shoes in your closet?
17 years ago in Lithuania, a young woman in her early 20s was struggling with a problem many of us will have faced.
She had too many clothes. She couldn't resist a sale, and her wardrobe had just massively ballooned. And to make things even worse, she had just moved to the capital of Vilnius to study for a master's degree. So she was now in a much smaller flat than her family home, and her wardrobe simply didn't fit. So she's thinking about this, and then she goes to a housewarming party where she bumps into a friend who just happens to be a computer genius. She starts talking to him about what do you do about this sort of massive clothes surplus. Now, he was quite sceptical about the idea that she could sell them online. He knew that things like eBay already existed, and he personally did not own too many clothes, so he didn't see how this was a problem. But they start talking to the other drunken students at this party, and they start pitching an online site that sells secondhand clothes and asking if people would use it. And the women in the room were all saying yes.
What began as a series of drunken conversations at a party have now become a company worth £4.2 billion. So how did it get there? On a path that at one point saw it almost collapse. Why is it outperforming its rivals, and what makes Vinted so addictive? The story today, the rise, fall, and rise again of Vinted. Would you mind just reintroducing yourself to our listeners?
My name is Ditum, and I am a Times contributor.
And Vinted fanatic.
Yes, my second job is going on Vinted.
Well, just tell us about that. When did you first hear about it, and how often do you use it now? I mean, how much is it a part of your life?
Oof. So I went back and checked my history, and the first thing I bought on Vinted was just over 2 years ago. I went looking for a thick black leather belt to go with a dress that I just bought. And I bought, this is classic Vinted behaviour, I bought 2 belts because I wasn't
because you
sure.
Suddenly can.
Yeah, I wasn't sure which one would be perfect. So I thought, why not both? And told myself, another classic Vinted behaviour, that I would sell the one that I didn't end up using, and I still have it. I would say since then I have bought over 100 items. I think I check it at least once a day. I think it's the main place where I buy my clothes now. So right now, today, I am wearing a pair of trousers that I bought from Vinted about 6 weeks ago, and my new favourite pair of trousers in the world. I got them for £50, and they would have been well over 150 to buy new.
And that is part of the charm, I guess. I mean, for anybody who's listening who doesn't use Vinted, who doesn't know the phenomenon, just explain what it is and why it has such an appeal.
So Vinted is an app that sells secondhand goods. It's recently expanded into computer games and books and sort of homewares and records, but clothes are the main business. It's broadly similar to what people would recognise from eBay, in that items are listed by sellers, you search for them as a buyer, and you can make offers, you can bargain for a price that suits you. The thing that makes Vinted different is, first of all, it's really focused towards clothes. So it's got a very powerful search engine for all the things that are important to you when you're buying clothes. But it also feels much more personal than eBay does. So you have direct communication between buyers and sellers. You can look at, they call it the seller's wardrobe. So if there's someone whose style you can tell you kind of chime with, you can have a look and see what else they've got. And you can also just use it as a sort of a source of style inspiration.
And tell us a bit about the business side. When was it founded? How big is it? And who are its customers?
It's founded in 2008 and launches in the UK in 2014. It now has 16 million users in the UK and over 105 million globally in over 20 countries. It's now Europe's largest online marketplace for pre-loved clothes.
Yeah.
Its users obviously inevitably skew female, sort of 25 to 34. Men do use it. I actually bought a fantastic pink suit from a guy once who had obviously overestimated his appetite for wearing a pink suit.
It's a great place for the outfits you slightly regret.
It really is. I mean, we can talk later about my personal philosophy of Vinted. But you can really buy anything from high fashion. So it now has a verification service for designer items, which you can opt into, which was previously something that you would only find on sites that were really dedicated to high-end pieces. Like there's a site called Vestair Collective. Its kind of USP was verification. Now Vinted has moved into that market as well. You can buy things from famous people. Paul Mescal apparently used it to sell his Gladiator 2 press tour wardrobe. And
Now,
thrillingly,
that's a bunch of outfits I want to see him. I hope you're buying them, Sarah.
I mean, I'm not sure I can rock a loincloth, but I'm willing to try. And sort of most thrillingly of all to me, Rebecca Vardy is currently selling a bunch of bikinis and gym wear through it, according to the latest press on her efforts to repay her costs from the Agatha Christie libel trial. So you can get basically merch from some people who are selling things there. And there's a huge market, obviously, for children's clothes. So Canny Badnock says she buys children's clothes on there, which makes perfect sense because kids wear things for such a short length of time.
But so this is recycling clothes, but in quite a glamorous way. This is the sort of brand that celebrities want to be associated with. Just take us back to where it began. Take us back to the people who founded it.
It begins with that drunken conversation at a party between Milda Mikute, the woman with too many clothes, who was 22 at the time. She's now 39. So her father died when she was 6 years old. And when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, her family's savings just disappeared into the chaos. I think a lot of families had very similar experiences. Her mother works incredibly long hours as a data entry clerk for the government statistics department, which means that Mikute and her sister are basically looking after themselves a lot of the time. But she gets a degree in culture management and she had moved on to working for a master's at the time of this party. And the friend she is talking to at the party is called Justas Janauskas, and he is a computer whiz. He's represented Lithuania in the maths Olympiad. So, no slouch when it comes to numbers. And I think it is that good union of two people with very different skills. She said that he was as good at tech as she was bad.
At the time, I was very good at shopping, but very terrible in tech. I got my first computer, then I was 19. I didn't know how to create new folder in a computer and how to copy-paste files there.
But she's the person who understands this market and recognises this need for a site that is really specialised in wardrobe recycling. They'd met a few years earlier when they were hitchhiking around Morocco. So they had a bit of history before they come together and have this, stroke of genius, essentially.
So they are actually friends despite being so wildly different.
Yeah. So the day after the party, Janauskas starts working on the website and 2 weeks later, they have it ready to launch. So things really start incredibly quickly when it comes to Vinted. It's immediately a hit. So it spreads via word of mouth, which is actually how I heard about it as well. I mean, Vinted becomes one of the top 10 websites in Lithuania within 3 years of launch.
Wow, a very, very rapid ascent.
Really rapid. Although, like many tech businesses, it's not actually making any money at this point. So they use online classifieds to sort of cover their expenses, but it doesn't have fees built into the service, which is obviously that's a big appeal for people because nobody loves spending money, especially not when they're trying to find a bargain or make a bit of money out of their old closet. But it does mean that for a long time, Vinted is running relatively nip and tuck. So a few companies kind of come in and try to lowball them with purchase offers of about 150,000 euros, which, knowing what Vinted has come to be, that would be a ludicrous bargain. That would be an even bigger bargain than my trousers.
Well, it must have been tempting for a couple of poor students who have set up a website that isn't actually making money.
I mean, absolutely. But this is the point at which they have to kind of choose to go all in and really commit to the grind of running a startup.
What does that mean for them? I mean, are they giving up jobs?
In the beginning, it means working effectively 2 jobs. So Makute is with a PR agency and Janauskas is a software developer. And at this point, Vinted is established in Germany, it's established in the Czech Republic. And this is the point where they decide to take a small investment from a Lithuanian startup investor. Then they move into France, and then things really start to get rolling.
So it's France that transforms it.
Yeah, and I guess unsurprisingly, right? Because, France is the country that you associate with not just fashion, but with style and with this idea of sort of building a timeless wardrobe. So it does make a lot of sense that French women would jump onto an idea like this.
Yeah. And Sarah, was it always, from the moment it began at that party, has it always been called Vinted? Because it does feel like that's part of its genius. It's such great branding.
Vinted is such a great name. Just this little portmanteau of vintage and minted, which is, I assume,
So
what
clever.
it is. And I was like, are Lithuanians generally that au fait with British slang? But apparently, as far as I can tell, yes. So Vinted has always been the name, and it's perfect for it.
So that's a model that seems to really be taking off at this stage. Both the founders have cancelled everything else, decided to really focus on it, to build the business. How does that pan out?
So by 2011, they'd raised 70 million euros, and every year the number of users was growing by double-digit percentages. This is really phenomenal growth. And they do what a lot of companies do when they're experiencing this kind of early growth, which is that they expand and they spend a lot of money. So they open new offices in London, in Paris, and San Francisco. And everything is looking pretty fantastic for Vinted until they change this crucial part of their business and they nearly destroy the entire company.
Sarah, you were just telling us how well things were going for Vinted. Back in 2012, roughly, they've suddenly gone global, they're opening offices everywhere. And then they change one thing and almost derail the entire business. Just tell us about that.
So by this point, Vinted is still only making money from running ads on the site, which is a pretty marginal amount of money to be bringing in, and they quite reasonably decide that they want to make money from the business concept itself. So they start charging a seller's commission fee of up to 19%. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the sellers do not like this.
This is people who want to sell their clothes on the Vinted website would now be paying commission on that.
Right, and over 18 months, the sellers basically disappear. And of course, if there's no one selling anything, no one is going to be coming in to buy stuff.
Ah, I can imagine the business starts to dry up. What do the founders do?
They hire a Dutch e-commerce expert to sort them out. He's called Thomas Plantenga. And he is, I mean, I hate to national stereotype, but I do really think of the Dutch as sort of both very no-nonsense and quite hippie-ish in some ways. So he does extremely fit all my prejudices about who the Dutch are. He's this kind of free-spirited entrepreneur. He's living in New York. At the time, he's between jobs and he's spending most of his time skateboarding, which is It's so Dutch.
Of course he is.
So originally he comes in on what's supposed to be a 2-month rescue mission. But what he says is that they showed me the numbers and I was like, oh my God, you're in so much trouble. So he describes joining the company and people were just crying and shouting in meetings, and there was only enough cash left to keep things afloat for 9 months. It's a really, really perilous moment. And this turns into his biggest company rescue operation to date. So first of all, he just wields the axe. He closes the offices in Paris, London, Munich, and Los Angeles, and he lays off 90 members of staff, almost 40% of the workforce. Pretty brutal stuff. And obviously, this is the kind of thing that he does for a living. It's his job to go into companies and sort them out. But in this case, it's really, really tough because Vinted is so beloved in Lithuania. And Lithuania is a pretty small country. So he says he would sort of find himself in Ubers and then the driver would realise who he was and boot him out of the car because they were friends with someone who'd got fired from the company.
Oh, no.
I guess to his credit, his attitude was, I need to do this, otherwise everybody is going to lose their job.
And did it work? Did all of these changes, were they enough to rescue the business?
Yeah, well, luckily for Thomas Plantenga's future as an Uber passenger, it did work out.
That could have ended badly.
So obviously the first thing in a situation like that is to really cut down the costs and make sure that the business can actually cover its expenses. But the really significant thing he does after that is that he brings in a new business model. So because it is already cheaper and easier for people to sell secondhand on other platforms, what he suggests is that Vinted slash the commission rate and instead they put the costs onto the buyers. And this is genius, right? Because the sellers are really the core of the market, aren't they? The reason I go to Vinted is because I know I can find the kind of things that I'm looking for, the kind of things that I want to buy. And once I've committed to buying it, I really do not have any objections to covering whatever fees are incorporated into that purchase. I want the thing, I'm going to pay for the thing. But because the sellers don't have to foot those costs, there is a really big incentive for them to be on Vinted rather than on other platforms that might be charging them for listings. And this works. A year later, the company is breaking even and Plantenga agrees to stay on as chief executive, which is a huge deal. He's kind of, he's left behind his sort of skateboarding life. He's left behind the prospect of, adventuring through other companies that need rescuing to make Vinted his job and his mission.
So this is a big moment of renewal. He's managed to get the company to start profiting again. It's doing that in other parts of the world. It still hasn't really taken off in the UK. When does that happen?
No, it's really slow to take off in the UK. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. And probably the big one is that Britain had really gone quite hard in with fast fashion. Britain is the home of Topshop, right? Which is the original fast fashion in its high street form. It's really built into the way that British women build their wardrobes, is that you buy relatively cheap and you don't necessarily worry about what the future of your garments is going to be. So it does struggle to break through in the UK. The thing that changes that is when the pandemic comes, which means that everyone is basically forced into shopping online. It also encourages people to think about refreshing their wardrobes and sorting their lives out in a lot of cases. And once it starts to take off in the UK, it really takes off. Britain is now Vinted's biggest market after France. And overall, the company is absolutely flying. So in 2019, it becomes Lithuania's first unicorn, which means it's a startup that hits the magical valuation of $1 billion. And last year, it was valued at $5 billion, which is £4.2 billion.
That's incredible for a company set up at a party 17 years ago.
For what you could consider a glorified jumble sale, that is an extremely big deal.
And Sarah, given it is doing so well, you know, as somebody who is, as you say, on it every single day, what is it about it that makes it so addictive, that means it's doing so remarkably well?
I think the first thing that makes it feel very exciting is that it does have that kind of gambler's pleasure of not really knowing what's going to come up. So there are a few things that I'm looking for at the moment, and it's just a little tiny buzz in my day-to-day life of checking in on Vinted and seeing if anything that fits my criteria has shown up, which I know makes me sound extremely pathetic, but this is what passes for excitement in my life. There's the buzz of getting a bargain, which is fantastic. It also feels ethical. It is nice to think that I'm buying things that would otherwise be, you know, languishing in somebody else's wardrobe or, you know, worst case, ending up being shipped off to landfill eventually. Justus Jonauskas, the computer whiz guy, he took some of Vinted's users for coffee, and what he found out from talking to them is that they were really drawn to the platform because it made them feel as if they were part of a community of resellers helping each other out. And it is quite a cute feeling. It's nice. People say things like, I'd love for this dress to find its forever home. And it's like, oh, I'm helping.
And Sarah, you mentioned, you know, one of the things that appeals about it is that it feels ethical, that you're basically recycling clothes. I suppose one of the questions about it, though, is that particularly in the UK, the remarkable rise of Vinted has meant that a lot of people who would otherwise have given their clothes away to charity shops aren't doing that anymore. People aren't browsing in charity shops so much either. Is that something that worries you?
I mean, it's definitely a problem for charity shops that have always relied on having high quality bargains. And you can see, for example, Oxfam has its own website, which is essentially a kind of boutique Vinted, where they put up the more valuable pieces to try and give a bit more of that pleasant shopping experience that you can have through Vinted. But half of charity shop operators have told the Charity Retail Association that their income is suffering from a decline in the quality of donations. I don't really bother looking at charity shops anymore, to be honest, because most people who have got anything that's good enough quality that I'd be interested in buying it are not donating it these days. Charity shops are tragically full up of things from Primark and Shein.
Wow, it really is a big difference. And in the meantime, for Vinted, which has already become such a huge success, what's next?
Plantenga has big plans for it. The dream is to turn Vinted into the Amazon of secondhand retail. So it's recently expanded into electronics, and it's also established 7,000 parcel lockers and drop-off points in France, a network which, you know, it could well be expanding into the UK at some point, and which gives it control over the entire operation, right? From sales and purchase to delivery. That is a huge deal. And it's looking at how to operate its own fleet of electric trucks to deliver orders, and it's testing an in-house payment service. So it's really looking at what in the business world is called vertical integration, just providing the full package. And so in the same way that people used to think of Amazon as a bookshop, but actually Amazon is a massive search engine and warehousing operation that just happened to start with books.
Yeah.
I think you can say the same is true of Vinted to a certain extent, in that it's actually a courier service that happens to have a clothes resale arm attached to it. And if you think about a business that is able to do payments, is covering deliveries, and has the incredible coding power that Vinted has established, suddenly you're looking at something that can go much, much further than being a secondhand clothes market. The potential for that is enormous.
It's Amazon-style growth.
Right.
And Sarah, as somebody who uses it as often as you do, are there any downsides?
I'd say the big downside for me is that I tell myself I'm going to resell stuff and then never do. So I was going through my shopping history and realised that last year I bought some over-the-knee boots, which is a real classic, nice idea for someone else purchase. I think I wore them about 3 times and then realised I looked like a principal boy and it was all over.
And you're not reselling them?
Well, do you know what? Here and now feels like a great moment to commit myself to reselling them. Anyone wants some boots that make you look like Peter Pan? Look me up on Vinted.
That was the writer Sarah Ditum, and you can read some of her latest pieces for The Times on subjects as diverse as assisted dying, motherhood, and Karate Kid at thetimes.com with a subscription. The producer today was Olivia Case, the executive producer was Fiona Leach, and sound design and theme composition were by Mal Lassetto. Thanks for listening. See you again soon.